Hello, I'm Vanessa Timmer, Executive Director of OneEarth Living, and here on behalf of Early Music Vancouver, and it is my great pleasure to be joined by Suzanne Simard, Professor of Forest Ecology at the University of British Columbia, and author of Finding the Mother Tree and When the Forest Breathes, who's really helped us look at how nature's ecosystems are deeply interconnected. And also, I'm really pleased to be with Pat Carrabré, who is a Métis composer. He's the director here at the Chan Centre for the Arts, and also a professor of composition at the University of British Columbia's School of Music. We are here together because Early Music Vancouver commissioned you, Pat, to put together a beautiful piece, which I've been able to hear. And I wondered if you could bring us back to the moment where you heard from Early Music Vancouver. What was the invitation in terms of this composition?
Well, like most of the pieces that I've been really proud of and happy with, they start with a chat over lunch or some kind of food. So Susie and I were having lunch, and she kind of brought up the subject of a program that they were going to have that had to do with the forest. So there was a Baroque piece that they were particularly interested in programming, and she thought it would be good to have something contemporary to go along with that. And you know, I thought, oh wow, okay, forest. I've been writing a lot of music about water. I've had several projects where water was really the focus, and having moved out here in 2019, I thought, wow, the forest. I've been wandering around these forests here, and as a prairie person, they're just so out of my context of the world that I felt that it would be a great opportunity to take that kind of inspiration and to turn it into some music. So it was, and the invitation was to write for the Pacific Baroque Orchestra, all of whom I just love what they do and how they play. So that was really exciting.
And when you saw this kind of BC forest ecosystem, and you have this question from Susie about composing, how did you come to look towards Suzanne Simard's work and Finding the Mother Tree? Well,
I think one of the things that I've been trying to do in the last 20 years, I guess, is to have my music more connected to the place that I'm in and the people that I'm with. And I think that's one of the things that is kind of a hallmark of indigenous creativity, is that it's much more personal. You know, so when I was working with other indigenous musicians in Manitoba, they were my friends. They were people that I came to share food with and to share my time with and talk about different things with, right? And so I would get up on the stage, well, I'm going to have my friend so-and-so come and do drum singing, or I'm going to have my friend so-and-so come and do throat singing, or whatever it was that we were working with. And it's a sharing kind of culture that I was trying to work with. So being here to a new territory, it takes a while to find those connections, right? But I thought it was really important to reflect the place that I'm in the music. And so I looked around and I pulled a few books out, and I thought, well, is it poetry? Is it prose? And I knew that EMV was working with Suzanne on a couple of projects. So I started digging through her book and thought, can I find a thread of a story that will work in a kind of cycle? And initially the idea was, 9 minutes, 10 minutes kind of thing. And so I picked a couple of samples, and I thought, can I write like 30 seconds of music that are going to make sense with Suzanne's prose, with her words? So I did that, and I shot them off to Susie, and I said, do these sound like they'll fit with the group? And what's your feeling how it would fit with the other music on the program? And that's when the three of us went and had coffee. So we got together and we talked a little bit about the project, and I thought, does it make sense? Because it's prose, not poetry, right? So normally when you're writing songs, it's often more poetic. And so trying to figure out how to convey your story in a short period of time, because in the end it grew to about 15 minutes, so it was 5 movements, because I just thought it needed more to tell the story, otherwise we wouldn't be able to get enough of the arc to get a sense of it, right? So I was so thankful that you were willing to give it a shot, because it's one of those things where I know when I've worked with other writers who've, like when you sing it for them or play it for them, they go, wow, I did not expect that at all. It can be a bit shocking because you've written it in your voice, in your head, with your way of thinking about sound, and then all of a sudden the flow is different, and there's a sound world that's built around them. So it's always very inspiring to work with other people who you know, and who, because for me it's trying to write in a way that I want to hear the thing, the person, the idea, and so it is very personal. And so I was a little nervous about having you here, but I think I'm pretty good with it.
And what was your experience when Pat came and that lunch? What was the experience for you?
Yeah, it was delightful to meet with Patrick and Susie and have lunch and think about setting this to music. And I didn't really know how it would work either, but when I'm in the forest, I hear music. It's not Baroque, it's the birds singing and the squirrels chattering, and then how I interpret the forest through my ears and sound. And so I thought it would be a natural thing to do. And I was interested to hear how Patrick heard the forest as well. And so for me, it's just like, okay, I had a great deal of curiosity, and how is Patrick going to translate these beautiful symphonies that are in the forest already for me? And I think for most people, when they walk through the forest, they hear this. Take the headphones off. It is a symphony out there.
One of the things that really struck me reading Finding the Mother Tree is that you experience forest as music, and also your prose, you ended up describing it in musical terms. And so as much as you were looking at how to bring prose into music, you were bringing music into prose. And I wondered if you were very kind to say that you would read an excerpt from Finding the Mother Tree. Perhaps before we go into the excerpt, what's happening? You and Dan, one of your research colleagues, are in the forest. What's taking place here that we're about to hear an excerpt from?
Yeah, so we'd set up this experiment where we had different species of trees growing in little neighborhoods. So there was a birch, a fir, and a cedar tree. And we were using isotopes to trace the movement of carbon. Carbon is the backbone of amino acids and carbohydrates, the very things that we're made of, to trace the movement of these compounds from one tree to another through these fungal networks. And so we had labeled the trees, one with a stable isotope called carbon-13, and another one with carbon-14, and we had cedar over here that doesn't join in the network of birch and fir. But we wanted to see where did these isotopes move. And so we had labeled the trees, and we were waiting for the trees to absorb that through photosynthesis, those isotopes, and then we were going to trace where it went. And so we were in the forest, we'd done the labeling, we waited a week for them to do their communication, and then we came back to see if the isotopes had moved to the neighboring trees.
Well, could you read that excerpt in the book, in your book, when you're waiting to find out?
Yes. Yeah, so Dan was telling me, we might not detect it. It might be so faint that we're not going to hear anything, that we've got to go back to the lab and really look for it. But I thought, would it hurt? So I'll just read. But what would it hurt to check with the Geiger counter now? We could try to get a reading in advance to see if there might be a hint that the Douglas fir needles held the answers. I calmed myself down. I was sure Dan was right. He knew more about labeling plants more than anybody. But what the heck? It cost nothing to try. I instinctively walked up to the neighboring fir and I knelt. Dad couldn't help but follow me and leaned over my shoulder. We both inhaled the piercing scent of fir needle resin, and for a moment I forgot about the years of difficult work and bouts of frustration. I brushed my hand over the end of the wand to make sure nothing was there to mask the signal. The moment of truth had come. The conductor raised her hands to the orchestra. The ensemble readied their instruments. Tilting my ear towards its stem, I ran the Geiger counter over the fir's needles. My wrists lifted slightly in an upbeat, and my Geiger counter wand crackled faintly as the dial on the meter swung up a tad. Strings and woodwinds, brass and percussion exploded as one, flooding my ears. The movement, allegro and intense, concordant and magical. I was enraptured, focused, immersed, and the breeze sifting through the crowns of my little birches and firs and cedars seemed to lift me clear up. I was much part of something much greater than myself. I shot a look at Dan, his mouth frozen open. Dan, I cried, did you hear that? He stared at the Geiger counter. He had wanted with his whole heart for the labeling to work, and what we were hearing was from the fir, was beyond anything he had expected. We were listening to birch communicate with fir.
Oh, I love that excerpt, and also the way you've painted a picture of that moment. How was that experience for you and Dan?
I mean, it was amazing. I think that we were both like in shock that it actually, because it was such a, the experiment was such an imaginative experiment. It was like, it came out of what we thought might happen, and then there it was. And it was beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, this is part of what you were really looking at, Pat, is with finding the mother tree, this connection to the forest that is, of course, in honoring the forest itself, but also the fact that this communication is happening, and it as much the interconnection with us as people as well. And so how did you find what you wanted to bring forward as prose from finding the mother tree for your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, that involved a process of kind of doing a search for words. So I would, load it up into my Kindle thing, and I would search for a couple words, and then I would go, okay, how do I start this? And then I would read, and I would go, okay, I can use these 3 sentences, and then that's going to be too much sound, too many words, so I need to go and find the next spot. So there are little gaps throughout the thing, but it was also trying to situate the whole thing in the context of a Baroque orchestra and a Baroque tradition, where there are traditions of lament and other kind of processes that I thought, I can make this work. And there were words, particularly I was interested in, like the symbolism of the eagle, where this eagle shows up when you're having a moment. And so I wanted to make sure that some of these things were there. And, there's a section where, Roundup takes the focus, and how horrific that can be, and I mean, so just to try and, there are these traditions of a doctrine of affections in Baroque music, where certain musical gestures have a meaning that everyone in the audience would know. Now, I'm not using those exactly, but I wanted the same kind of idea, that when anger was there, you could hear the anger. When sadness was there, you could hear the sadness. And when it soared, you could hear that too. So trying to figure out how to wrap all these things around in your story with a rather lot of text compared to a poem. One of the things that I feel I have a certain responsibility to foreground is the kind of the curatorial idea that I've done this research creation. So I do a lot of research before I start writing a piece. Usually there's a concept, something that I'm hoping I can provide an opportunity for people to focus on for a minute. Sometimes it's just the virtuosity and beauty of somebody playing an instrument, but in this case, it's bigger than that. And so the idea of helping or providing the audience with that moment of connection, engagement, where they can go they can contemplate on the ideas that are represented in this piece, and then it leads them to something else. It may be to read Suzanne's book again or for the first time. It may be just to go and take a walk in the forest and think about it. It may be to ask some of their family what they're thinking about, but it's just that invitation to connect and engage and to contemplate. You're in a concert, as someone said, this is either a moment to engage or it's a really expensive nap, And so I hope that it's that moment to engage, to think about something that you may not otherwise have taken the time to think about in the context. So I'm just thankful always when I can find a project like this that is so beautiful and is so rich in so many different ways, and then provide an opportunity for people to go, yeah, okay, I'm thinking about that for the next 15 minutes. And then maybe on the drive home, they'll talk about it, and then it goes from there.
And it's also such a moving experience. I think I'd be curious, Suzanne, in your experience, because I think that idea of having it be an immersive experience that stays with you. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder if that was your experience as well of being in Christchurch, and what is your hope that having experienced it, people will take with them?
I think that one thing that Patrick did that I think caught people's attention was, you can write a beautiful piece about the forest and feel the symphony of the forest. But what Patrick did is he took that moment of beauty and he said, wait a minute, round up. There's something wrong here. There's something that needs to be fixed. And you emphasized it, round up, round up, round up, round up. And so that when people walked away from that, I think they'll remember that and they'll think, what was he trying to tell us about that? And then to come back then to the beauty of the forest. So you were able to take that story and embed in it the music that they're going to remember, that one, especially that one piece that stood out. And they're going to go, I'm going to go look into this and see what I can do for the forest. I don't know. I thought it was brilliant the way you did that. I was surprised, I would say, because I didn't know how you would interpret that and whether you would, because you could have glossed over it. But that was the key message. We are in this moment of choice, and we're in a crucial moment in the history of man, in the history of the world, really. And we're having mass extinctions, and we've got climate change, and people are afraid. And some people feel hopeless. We're just on this train, and we're just going to have to ride it out and see where it goes. But really, it's about choices. It's about carrying out these obligations to our fellow man and our fellow, relations, the more than human world. And so in this moment now, all of these things come to bear, how we convey it in music, how we convey it in prose and poetry, or in the political world, in the marketplace. The messages need to come in many forms, and then so that we can make a proper choice, so that we can think, what do I want the next generations to experience, and to look at the suite of things out there that we can choose from. We can change our marketplace, we can change our laws, we can change our policies. All of those things need to bring to bear. And we need, to convey this in very many avenues. So I can't emphasize enough, I think, how important these pieces coming at this moment are for people to really contemplate it, really bring it into themselves and say that I own this too. I'm part of this too, and I have choices to make. And yeah.
Many people listening to us connecting here will go on to listen to the piece. So I just wonder if you have an invitation as they move into hearing your amazing composition.
Oh, well, I don't know about that, but okay.
That was my experience. I hope yes,
Thank
absolutely.
You. I guess for me, giving people the opportunity to use this musical statement, which is hopefully representing your ideas reasonably well, that people can engage with that, and it's just that spark that will help them to take the next step.
Thank you both so much. So Suzanne Simard, Professor of Forest Ecology here at UBC, author of Finding the Mother Tree and coming up When the Forest Breathes, as well as Pat Carrabré, a Métis composer, also here at UBC as a professor of composition. Thank you both so much. I welcome you to enjoy Finding the Mother Tree, a composition as part of Early Music Vancouver. Thank you.